Hello, Sex Therapy 101 friends. You notice I might have taken a break, but we're back and we're excited. And I'm really passionate about this new series that I'm going to be offering to all of you. I haven't disappeared. I've been working on some projects that are really meaningful to me. And one of those is a book for the public about my research about regarding long-term outcomes of consenting to unwanted sex or duty sex, as we sometimes call it. And in doing that, adding to my own research over the year, you'll see my hair change, my face change, because these were all recorded over the course of a year. And I wanted to talk to experts about the cultural implications or cultural beliefs or the cultural ideas among different communities in the US that might protect people against negative outcomes and that might actually kind of promote people into some of the more negative outcomes. And that is the series I have to offer you. I'm really excited. It's been really meaningful to me. It's been enlightening to me. It's really helped me make sure that this book is what I want it to be for all of you. So with no ado, here we go. This is going to be the intro for the whole series. And I'll give you a little bit of a bio for each, and then we'll jump into the recording of the interview. In this interview, I have a conversation with Aubri Lancaster. It was really important to me to make sure we made this distinction about orientation. Aubri is an certified sexuality educator. Her focus is in asexuality, aromanticism, and the mechanics of arousal. She's also a secular Jewish, non-divergent, gray romantic, asexual femme. And it's fantastic to have this conversation with her and get her input on a conversation that we need to put a seat at the table for this population. And I'm really happy to have learned from her and hope that you find it stimulating as well. I was working on the book proposal for this, and the research, the demographics were just too homogeneous. And we did have an orientation box. Most everyone selected heterosexual, but some selected bisexual, but no one self-selected asexual. But as I'm looking at this, I'm like, it's just complex. And so I wanted to have this conversation with you because I don't want to put a book out there about desire and not acknowledge this very valid human experience. And
Thank you.
I didn't just want to like pretend it didn't exist or didn't apply to this discussion. So I appreciate you being willing to teach me and to talk through all this. But okay, so we'll
Great.
start. Question one. Using your clinical lens, through the way that you're trained to look through at sexuality, how would you interpret my research findings and how would you explain what I demonstrated that we found with these 1,300 women?
I just really appreciated the language of consenting to unwanted sex.
Mhm.
Just being able to name that, I think, is so huge because there is this push that it's either fully consensual, enthusiastic, yes, or it's sexual assault. And
Mhm.
no discussion of what that in between can look like. And I really appreciated, especially that element of recognizing that some people may not call it assault, may not feel that it was non consensual, and yet it was still unwanted.
Mhm.
And I thought that was really important to be able to name that. And I'm absolutely going to be bringing that into my work. Um, the other stuff that stood out to me was being able to name all of the different emotional responses people had to consenting to unwanted sex, because again, being able to name these things and say, even if you fully consented, you heart of hearts consented, there was still negative impact,
Mhm.
and being able to hold both of those truths at once.
Yeah.
And then even to recognize that some of them consented and didn't feel there was any negative impact.
Yeah.
And that's a niche I think can be explored a lot more too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where I would go with that and what I expand on that is when I talk about some of these elements, especially for asexual people.
Hmm.
um, some asexual people do want to engage in sexual activity. It just may not be motivated by sexual attraction.
Hmm.
And some asexual people have no interest in sexual activity with another person, maybe with themselves, or maybe not.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, a lot of asexual people, I think, find themselves in that space that if they want to have a romantic partner, they
Mm-hmm.
must expect that they will be consenting to sex.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, I think that there are probably a lot of asexual people who are in mixed orientation relationships who are
Yeah.
consenting to unwanted sex.
Yeah.
And again, we can look at that in a couple of different ways as far as whether or not that is a problem for them.
Yeah.
This is where I bring in the language of favor versus chore.
Okay. Oh, okay. I
Yeah,
like
like
this. Okay.
you could
Yeah.
do a favor for somebody,
Uh-huh.
and it doesn't mean that you particularly got anything out of it by doing it, but you know that they enjoyed it and you're happy to do it. A favor is freely given. And if you don't have the capacity and you say no, there's no consequences. You just move on. They figure
Mm-hmm.
out what they need to do about it. A chore is expected. And there are consequences if you don't do a chore. So I often will talk to people about how to kind of locate them that for themselves,
Hmm.
is this a chore? Is it freely given? Like I don't like cooking, but
Same.
I yeah, but I get satisfaction
Hmm.
out of knowing that the food that I've made is being enjoyed.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
So, somebody who is consenting to unwanted sex can still get satisfaction out of making their partner happy, out of giving that gift to their
Yeah.
partner.
I like this language because O'Sullivan was using language like approach or avoidance motivations, but I don't know that the everyday person is going to get that. But I like your language, which is much more understandable of favor versus chore.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's much more accessible.
And then we can also kind of transfer that over into those understandings of capacity. What do we
Uh-huh.
do if there is a request and we don't have the capacity for it?
Hmm.
So, I don't have the capacity to make dinner tonight. What are our options? Either my partner makes it, or we eat out,
Hmm.
or we just fend for ourselves and get our own food.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that same thing again can transfer over into a sexual setting of if somebody asks for a sexual favor and the other person doesn't have the capacity for it or doesn't want to, first of all, there has to be conversations around handling rejection,
Hmm.
handling a no,
Right.
not taking it personally. So there's a lot of that. And that can be a huge point of discussion.
I
Ah,
like how you highlighted it, that there needs to be some discussions here and some options and looking at some negotiation that's like not
yeah.
coercive, but is what are our options?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think the kink community gives us a lot of
Yeah.
really great language
Hmm.
that we assume is only within that context. But I think all of that can so importantly be used in any sexual encounter. Negotiation, consent, safe words,
Hmm.
aftercare,
Yeah.
all of that needs to be taught in all sexual contexts and everything else too. I mean, if you're going to be in a highly activated, intense situation, you need to know how to stop it,
Hmm.
how to take care of yourself when it's over,
Hmm.
all of those sorts of things. And I think that
Nice.
for those who are consenting to unwanted sex, who want to consent for some reason where it's not coerced,
Hmm.
those are things that can help mitigate those negative feelings that come out of it.
Hmm. Some of that aftercare. Yeah,
Right.
we
Yeah.
can
But I mean,
totally
all
use
of
that
that.
better. Yeah.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
negotiation. What are we going to
Hmm.
actually do? What are we going to engage in? It's not going to be a
Right.
surprise. Here is what I
Collaborative.
am
Yeah.
agreeing to. Here are my boundaries. Here is what I don't want to do. Let's do our thing. And then afterwards, we can debrief and have a conversation about what worked, what didn't,
Hmm.
and maybe create a new menu of things to try.
And it's so valuable. Do you see that language permeating from the kink community into the larger, um, into other communities? Like, I totally agree with you, and I'm wondering, what do you see? Do
I
you
don't
see
see
that
it
shift?
enough.
Enough. Yeah. Yeah.
Like I really see that mostly discussed with people who are doing work around kink.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Consent is
Mm-hmm.
talked about in multiple spaces. I really there's a couple of things around consent that I find helpful in the context of consenting to unwanted sex. First of
Mm-hmm.
all, um, Betty Martin's Wheel of Consent.
I know she's so great.
The simple concept of understanding who the touch is for,
Yeah.
I think, is huge, especially within that context of consenting to unwanted sex. If somebody is consenting to receive touch and is told it's for them, but it's not, it's
It's
for the
not.
person doing the touching.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Being able to explore that and play those little games, because one of the things that really stood out for me in the Wheel of Consent book was how she talked about there would be a moment when they're playing these games where it would suddenly click.
Mm-hmm.
They would be
Mm-hmm.
saying, well, what do you want to do? No, 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 it's not about you, it's about it's not about them, it's about you. How do you
Mm-hmm.
want to be touched?
Right.
And they wouldn't really get it at first, and then after actually doing it, it would hit a point where they're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
oh. So I think that in and of itself can really help people to recognize if they are consenting to something unwanted or not.
Yeah.
Because I think there is that, when there's an expectation that
Mm-hmm.
this is what's going to happen, especially for, women, but also, I think asexual men
Yeah.
and men who have a lower desire than their partners
Mm-hmm.
get not only all of that as well, but there's also this challenge to their masculinity that gets tied into it.
Yeah. You're
If
right. Mm-hmm.
when masculinity is defined by virility and
Mm-hmm.
sexual prowess and all of
Mm-hmm.
these things,
Mm-hmm.
any step in the other direction on any of that is very shamed and not talked about. So, I definitely would love to see some of these numbers for men who consent to unwanted sex.
Right. I agree. I'm interested too. I can't do all the studies at once,
I know. Oh,
but
and then
they
the
need to
other,
be done.
yeah. And then the other tool around consent that I find really useful is Emily Nagoski's Four Levels of Consent. Are you familiar with that one?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks for
Yeah.
bringing that up. Yeah.
Enthusiastic, willing, unwilling, and coerced.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that willing level that gets so misunderstood, because we have this idea of what enthusiastic consent looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And we can sometimes at least identify coerced consent, although not always, but
Mm-hmm.
especially willing. Why would you just be willing and not enthusiastic? And that's when it comes down to, there are many different reasons people will have sex beyond their own personal desires, and while I also think it's super important to reiterate, you don't owe anyone sex ever. You
Mm-hmm.
don't owe anybody access to your body ever, partner or not.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a service you are required to perform. Sex is a co created activity.
Mm-hmm.
And you can still be willing and happy to do that favor for somebody
Mm-hmm.
else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, and then that long-term expectation kind of comes into play. Like, is a no contingent on a yes tomorrow,
Right.
or is every no freely accepted so that a
Mm-hmm.
yes can truly freely be given?
Right. I like how you appraised that for sure. All right. So I wanted to speak with you specifically for your expertise with the, asexual, aromantic, gray, all those spaces coming together. Are there aspects that you see of community culture that are protective against CUS? And you just probably named them, the four levels of consent, um, Betty Martin's work, the um, safe word, aftercare, consent, those kinds of things. Is there anything specifically in that asexual space that you see that is protective?
So, some language that's come out of the asexual community that I absolutely love and I think applies on so many different levels and can be so helpful in so many different ways is the language of favorable, indifferent, averse, repulsed. So, we can
Okay.
look at attitudes about engaging in sexual activity in both cultural ways and personal ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, cultural attitudes about engaging in sexual activity include being sex positive, thinking sex is fine, not necessarily for me, but for whoever is consenting and, happy and willing. Sex neutral, not really placing any value judgment on sex. It's a thing, it exists.
Mm-hmm.
And sex negative, to have a negative attitude towards sex in general, to think it's bad or dirty or wrong, and to also mandate sex within specific parameters.
Mm-hmm.
That's all within that sex negativity. But then we look at personal attitudes of engaging in sexual activity. Somebody may be sex favorable. They have they're favorable towards having sex. They want to engage in sexual activity. Sex indifferent. They could take it or leave it. You want to have sex? Sure, we'll have sex. Sex averse. No, I don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
To be averse to engaging in sexual activity. And then sex repulsed, to have a visceral response to
Yeah.
the idea of engaging in sexual activity or even seeing sexual content in media or in conversations. Now, we pathologize averse and repulsed heavily, but if you
Yes.
think about it, I don't know your sexual orientation, but if you are sexually oriented towards a single gender,
Mm-hmm.
and you are presented with the opportunity to have sex with somebody who is of a gender you're not attracted to, or just in general, think about, somebody you're not sexually attracted to, and you're presented with the opportunity to have sex with them. Maybe you're favorable. Maybe you're like, hey, sure,
Mm.
let's give it a try. Maybe you're averse, you
Yeah.
just aren't into this person, and the idea of having sex with them is not cool. Or you have a visceral response like, oh my God, I would never do that.
This is fascinating. I've never thought about it that way. We are all averse, sexually dependent on context.
Yes.
This is fascinating. I've never thought about it that way. Thank you so much.
And yet, that just is assumed when you talk about an asexual person who may be averse or repulsed towards sex of any kind.
Hmm.
There's this assumption that it must be trauma related or there
Yeah.
must be a reason. And there is no acceptance of this idea that, well, if you're just not sexually attracted to the person, yeah, it's totally reasonable. You might be averse or even repulsed to that idea.
Mm, I love that. Thank you. That was like a whole new idea to me, and I love it so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. What about aspects of ace culture, gray culture that it gets messy and it maybe promotes some damaging consenting to unwanted sex?
um, so we have the term compulsory sexuality,
Okay.
which is the assumption that everybody wants and needs sex and is defined by some kind of sexual attraction.
Hmm.
And that basically, in order to have a romantic relationship, you must be willing to engage in sexual activity. It's mandated through a lot of religious models
Sure.
and even political legal models. If you think about wanting to get citizenship with a partner, if you're not having sex or romantically connected to them, you're not
Right.
going to get a green card as their partner.
Hmm.
The idea of what's the word? Consummating a marriage. We have all of these ways that we define relationships through sex.
Like the validity hinges on this
Yes.
one behavior. Yeah. Hmm.
And the validity of adulthood, to
Hmm.
lose your virginity and become an adult.
Hmm.
That to be an adult virgin is either to be waiting for somebody to end that state, that it's this liminal state of existence, or that there is a failure of some kind along the way, either a failure of character or a failure of, gender,
Hmm.
to that you are either unappealing to others or you don't meet some societal bar
Right.
that qualifies you to be worthy of this thing called sex. So there is a lot of pressure, not specifically from the community, but that the community
That the
deals with
community feels. Yeah.
constantly as
Yeah.
being part of society. The idea, like, I will never find a partner if I'm not willing to have sex. Um, so that is a heavy stigma. There's a lot of people that don't know they're asexual until they're in a relationship and they're spending this time figuring out, why don't I like this thing that I was told I was going to really, really like once I was finally in this relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so uh Beyond that, I think within the community, the biggest challenges become prescriptivism.
Yeah.
You
That makes
know,
sense. Uh-huh.
David J., who created the Avon forums in the early 2000s, did us all a huge favor and was very clear that everybody gets to define their own labels. And he ran his forums with that idea that, everybody is the final arbiter of their own labels. You get to decide what labels work for you. If you say you're asexual, then you get to use the word asexual.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't stop people from saying, oh, wait a minute, if you do this, you're not
You're
asexual.
not
Or if you do
really.
this, right. And to really get down into that, well, do you like this? Or do you do this thing? Or, starting to really ask all of those qualifying questions
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that take away that agency.
That makes
That also
sense.
becomes a challenge when asexual people are trying to uh, validate their queerness within queer spaces
Right.
and are invalidated that way, being
Right.
told, well, if you have any sort of inclination towards a cross gender attraction, whatever that even means, that you're not queer.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Not recognizing that queerness is a spectrum, the idea of not conforming to heteronormativity in and of itself is queering the experience.
So some of the pressure comes from just living in a larger society that's expecting things, and some of it is within the community. We've got like gatekeeping of terms and trying to determine who's in, who's out. Your letter's so far down that you don't matter as much. That, yeah, I really appreciate that. That those are
Mm-hmm.
some of the aspects everyone's dealing with that impacts, you know, our self-identity, claiming it for ourselves, and can influence our choices of whether we think we should consent to unwanted sex or if we shouldn't. If I do, does that change who I am? This identity piece. Yeah.
That it's a deal breaker,
Yeah.
that sex is automatically going to be a deal breaker. Do I disclose in a dating profile if I'm asexual,
Hmm.
or can I have that conversation in the getting to know you phase?
Yeah.
Which there are pros and cons to each. But just as with anything, there's lots of different things that might be deal breakers in a relationship. We set sex as this top most important thing, but that's not a priority for everybody, regardless of orientation.
Right. Right.
So just like you could be really into hiking and you want a partner who's also really into hiking, you may specifically seek that out. Or you may get together with somebody that you really like, but they're not into hiking, and you find another hiking buddy. A
Mhm.
lot harder to do sexually, but we are growing awareness around non-monogamous relationship models too that
Right.
may be more affirming for some people.
Right. Right. Okay, let's see. Question 4. As an expert in this field, what do you see as a solution for a woman experiencing negative outcomes of CUS? And how would you work with a woman or a couple experiencing this? Maybe it's a late in life orientation discovery and they realize, oh, I am asexual. We're in a mixed orientation marriage. We had no idea, or finding this woman who's saying, I really can't get to the favor. It's the chore. It's always, I
Mm-hmm.
can't get to making it a favor. When you're thinking about that, what do you see as solutions?
To find non-sexual forms of intimacy and pleasure to center in the relationship instead.
Mm,
Intimacy is closeness and connection and gets heavily conflated with the sexual, but there's emotional intimacy, feeling seen and heard and having deep conversations. There's intellectual intimacy, the sharing of knowledge and geeking out together, or sharing your
mm,
values with another person and having, those kinds of, intellectually stimulating conversations. There's sensual intimacy. Some
mhm.
asexual people still really want physical touch and cuddles and hand holding and kisses that doesn't have to move into a sexual space. And again, even those who are not asexual may not prioritize sex and may be just as happy to have that as a physical connection in the relationship.
Yeah.
So, it is entirely possible for the higher desire or allosexual partner to get their sexual needs met through their own engagement, through solo sex, using toys, lubes, porn, erotica, um, giving themselves permission and being given permission to explore solo sex in a fully embodied, pleasurable way, rather than only seeing it as a less than throwaway get it over with type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, giving even both partners that permission to explore individual solo sexual pleasure, because an asexual person with a high libido or who is interested in sexual activity may not be interested in sharing that
Right.
because it's
Right.
about directionality.
Right.
So they may feel all those feelings in their own body and have an interest in engaging with that, but just not feel like sharing it and doing it with somebody else. And that gets stigmatized too. There is this expectation that if they have those feelings, that they owe their partner to do that together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Reminding people, especially within desire discrepancy context, if you take two random people out of the population, the odds that they're going to have the exact same level of desire at the exact same time is almost impossible. Like desire discrepancy is inevitable in an
Right.
interpersonal sexual relationship. But
It's you can count on it. It's not that it's
yes,
disordered that might happen. You can
yes,
count on it. This will happen.
yes. And yet it is always or almost always the lower desire partner who is expected to meet the needs of the higher desire partner, rather than having that space in between be filled by other forms of intimacy and other forms of pleasure. What else brings them pleasure? And as Emily Nagoski says, that's enjoyment and satisfaction. What do they enjoy doing together? What do they both find fulfilling in the other 23 hours and 30 minutes in their lives when they're not having sex?
Mhm. And I appreciate that because it's so much intimacy is all somehow braided into one thing. And you can see, oh, if the sex stopped, everything stopped. And you're like, no, let's unbraid all these forms of intimacy and make them each have a valuable space that we can prioritize and receive fulfillment from instead of being like, it all comes with sex or none of it comes at all, you
Yes.
know?
Yes. What do
Yeah.
they like to do together? Do they like to cook together? Do they dance together? Do they watch TV together? Do they go out to eat together and try new foods and swap foods on their plates? And, my spouse brings me fun new flavors of Coffee Mate when he sees them at the store. They had a Mean Girls flavor recently.
That's funny.
It was like kind of a strawberries and cream flavor, but it was fun.
Yeah.
There's so many other
And it was
things we
intimacy.
can
You were thought
do.
of, you were considering each other, you were
Yeah,
prioritizing each other. You knew each other, what would matter, you know? Yeah.
yeah. Anne Hottership has their book, um, uh, the 18 love languages.
Mm,
Have you seen this one?
no, but I'm glad
Oh
because the
my
other one just
gosh.
makes me mad.
Yes, yes. So Anne's book is specifically in response to the, Christian
Yeah.
patriarchal, hetero model
Yeah.
of Gary Chapman's book. So Anne's book focuses centers platonic love, and they have 18 different languages instead of just five.
Oh, I'm so
And
glad you told me about this. I wasn't aware of this before.
it's a
Yeah.
great book. You could buy it for $4 digital on Amazon, and it's the fastest read you'll ever see. There's
Okay.
illustrations. It's a super quick, easy read. I don't remember the beginning, because it's 18 languages, but look up Anne Hottership. You know their name, right?
Yeah.
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 Um, But again, finding other ways to define love in the relationship, to seek pleasure in the relationship, to find intimacy between them, so that either sex can be taken off the table entirely in an interpersonal context and can be satisfied in a solo or non monogamous context, or there can be some level of sex that actually is freely given
Hmm.
and freely engaged in, that does center pleasure, and hopefully for both partners, but there is that concept that some people enjoy giving and not receiving.
Hmm.
Some people enjoy receiving and not giving.
Hmm.
And there is this expectation of mutual orgasm at the same time,
Hmm.
rather than making space for the reciprocity isn't actually what everybody wants. If you think
I
of,
agree. When I love like six principles of sexual health, and whenever I get to the principle of mutual, people will think it's reciprocity in it. To me, it's you each got what you wanted out. It was a
I love that.
like it was mutually enjoyable, but we only get to enjoyment if we kind of got what we each wanted. And it's okay if we wanted different things out of the experience, but both people were considered. What do you want out of
Yeah.
this? What do I want out of this?
And
But
also
not
just
reciprocity. I love that
right.
thing. Yeah.
And also just looking at the activity itself, some people specifically get off on giving and
Hmm.
don't really enjoy receiving.
Hmm.
So if they're paired with somebody who gets off on receiving and not giving, that can actually work out really well. And with an asexual person, they could be on either space on that as well.
Yeah.
So, and again, what are they getting out of it can be that satisfaction that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Like I love getting a neck massage. We could just take turns.
Hmm.
Or, if I walk up and I give my partner a neck massage, I get satisfaction out of knowing that they're enjoying that. They're relaxing. It's a physical touch between us. And even if I don't get a neck massage in return,
Hmm.
it's not like that was a failure of that experience. And
Right.
I can't be expected to enjoy giving a back massage in the same way that the person receiving it is enjoying it.
Hmm. Right. That's a good analogy. That's a good one. Yeah. Okay. Let's see how. I think we all have opinions on the DSM and the diagnosis of hypoactive desire interest disorder. Looking through the lens of this research, as well as your lens and your expertise, should these outcomes be considered as meeting DSM criteria for this diagnosis? Is it something completely different? Tell me your thoughts and opinions.
So the DSM-5 actually has an exclusion for people who identify as asexual on those diagnoses. And that was pushed by AVEN, the Asexual Visibility and Education Network. I do question the validity of pathologizing low desire in general. The duality of hyposexual and hypersexual creates this assumption that there is a normal.
You're right. Because it
And
creates the two extremes. And so we're going to deduce that somewhere in the middle is normal. We're going to make a bell curve in our head, whether we realized it or not. You're right. I'd never thought of that.
so we're either comparing it to a non-existent normal in between expectation, or we are comparing it to the other random person that's been pulled out of the population. And you cannot diagnose an individual as a pathology based on how they compare to this other random person.
It's too subjective.
Mm-hmm. Now, the HSDD and FSIAD diagnoses do have some useful elements in them. They talk about clinically significant distress.
Mhm.
Where is the distress coming from? Is it coming from societal pressure? Is it coming from a partner? Or
And
is it
that's
coming?
listed in the criteria. It says, or distress of your partner. I mean, it
It
talks,
does. It actually does suggest that interpersonal distress is a
yeah.
good reason to make that diagnosis, which I think is a
Mhm,
problem.
mhm,
Um, when it comes to internal distress, I think, that there is this, um, did they have a lifelong lack of desire, which I think actually lends more towards recognizing it as an asexual experience. But if they had this experience of desire and libido that suddenly changed, it's contextual. What are
mhm,
the other things going on? That might be a reason to look into it as a pathology. But if
mhm,
we're just looking at their natural level of desire and libido, how do we decide that that is a problem when they may be perfectly fine with being at that level,
mhm. And
except for the pressure?
the distress can come from the comparison, not
Yeah.
their internal experience, right? It's the distress can be in that comparison of I'm not
Mm-hmm.
experiencing what my partner is or my friend is or what it looks like everybody else is. And
Yeah. I do think it's useful with the fact that they kind of changed it, at least for the female version of it, with interest and arousal.
mhm,
Um, Arousal can be something that needs consideration because of the concept of arousal non-concordance.
mhm,
Is there subjective arousal but no physical response? That's something we can work with. If
mhm,
there is that subjective arousal, but they're not lubricating, they're not getting an erection, they're not getting any sort of arousal physical experience within their body, even if they're completely turned on in their head,
yeah,
well, that's something we can address.
yeah,
But if
yeah,
there's no subjective arousal and we're just telling them you should
you
have
should.
subjective arousal, that's that's a lot of social interpretation on an individual experience. It's okay to not want sex. It's okay to not
Mhm,
prioritize sex. We
mhm.
have to make space to let people know that's okay, regardless of orientation.
Let's see, we kind of answered this one. As an expert in the field, what do you see as the solution of preventing women experiencing negative outcomes of this, right? Because some people didn't have negative outcomes, some people did have negative outcomes. I think we've talked about it a little bit, but I wanted to see if you had additional thoughts.
Um, I think it's mostly what I said that,
Yeah.
really giving them the tools to understand consent, negotiation, safe words, aftercare, and to give them that ability to just not want it and to be okay with never wanting it and never wanting to engage in it. They may be averse or repulsed, and
Mhm.
that's not going to change.
Yeah.
And if they're favorable, it also doesn't mean that they're favorable for sex 3 times a week. My favorite analogy is going to Disneyland. It's super fun.
Mhm.
It's exhausting. Some people want to go every single day and others are like, give me a year or two.
Yeah. Yeah. But they're still Disney favorable.
Yeah,
They just,
exactly. So some people may be favorable towards having sex, but it's a special occasion, once in a while thing. And the pressure, the expectation to perform takes away all of the favorability and interest and just builds resentment and all of those negative feelings.
Mhm.
So we have to find a way to take away the expectation.
The expectation. That's part of the solution is how do we
Mm-hmm.
manage this expectation we've got as a society? And it's permeating every community. I mean, in the
Mm-hmm.
US, I'm making a huge statement. Someone can tell me if it's not, but I believe it probably is.
Yeah. And
Now
how
I
do you
want to,
support that higher desire partner in
Mhm.
accepting a no, in
Yeah.
accepting rejection,
Mhm.
in giving that option for no? One of the best lines I heard recently was from Andrew Hartman, who said, he was asking a favor of me that was not not sexual, but said, "A no is as welcome as a yes."
Mm.
And that was just beautiful to me. How can we give the higher desire partner language to give permission to say no so that everything doesn't rely on either acquiescing or rejecting.
Right. Right. Because with these expectations we all have, someone says, "Do you want to have sex?" There's only one right answer. Yes, is the right. So we have to address this so that
Or not
any
tonight.
or not
Let's
tonight.
defer this expectation. We're not taking away the expectation. We're just
Mhm.
putting it off
Moving it.
and
I love
making
this
it
language.
even more pressure the next time.
I love this language. No is as welcome as a yes. Yeah.
Andrew Hartman.
Andrew Hartman. That's the new expectation or the new goal. Okay, now tell me a little bit. You said that you had some thoughts that I didn't really write questions up for. So tell me a little bit, just this op-ed commentary. If I sent you this 10-minute video, I'm like, I want to know what your thoughts are. Here's what I found, but I want more eyes and opinions and thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think we wove a lot of it into the
Okay,
conversation. So
okay,
I'm feeling pretty good about what we touched on. And
okay.
again, I am really grateful for that language because it's been hard for me to name that for people too, that, to recognize that you can consent without it necessarily being coerced or
Mhm.
assault, that there's this space here for this idea. And also, even if it is coerced or there's these negative outcomes, the fact that you're going to have people that honestly feel that they have consented. And I can say that my first marriage was 7 years of that. I never, if I ever said no, he would stop. He
Mhm.
never physically assaulted me. He never physically forced me into anything. But boy, did he guilt trip me
Mhm.
into it
Yeah.
and use societal expectations to make me feel like this is something I must do, that it is necessary within the relationship, all of these forms of coercion.
Yeah.
But even within that, I never felt like, even though I got to the point where I was able to say it was coerced consent,
Hmm.
but I still wouldn't have called it assault.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
don't feel like he had any understanding of what was wrong with that situation.
Sounds
So
very
I
normal.
think that language of naming consenting to unwanted sex covers so much of that
Hmm.
because it acknowledges that the person feels that there is consent and names that it's still unwanted. I love that so much.
Moves us from the binary to more of a spectrum that we can have more accurate conversations about people's actual experiences instead of this binary of it was or it wasn't. And I
Yeah.
like what you pointed out. That is one concern of mine in like teaching this or writing a book about this or whatever this is going to become for me. I do have that concern that there are individuals who would conflate coercion with rape and instead of seeing it as a spectrum, which that we do have some research coming out that's really helpful that's trying to give us that spectrum of here we know we know these are the outcomes, but there's also verbal and emotional coercion and they have different outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
They're not, and just being able to pull that apart and create not such a binary, but I that is something I'm concerned about. The people will make a jump of I consented to unwanted sex. Does that mean it was assault? And here we're saying there's more options here
Yeah.
than that.
Well, I think that's what's also important about that, especially if you're able to use that language in a couple's therapy session where you don't want to stigmatize, you don't want people to get defensive. But
Mm-hmm.
if you can name, yes, it was consent and it was also unwanted activity.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
if we can name that in that setting, there might be a lot more room for somebody to acknowledge, oh, well, maybe if it was actually unwanted, then we shouldn't have done it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if you say it was coerced, well, now I have to explain to you why it wasn't coercion.
Or why I'm not a predator, why I'm
Right.
not a criminal, right? And that's not the
Mm-hmm.
discussion that I'm trying to have with people, but that is a defensive reaction. I've I've
Yeah.
I've seen more partners open to the idea, but I have seen a couple get super. a couple men specifically get super defensive. Um, and it
I
was,
mean, I think you're going to have that in any situation, but hopefully that can at least be some of that useful language.
I hope it is useful. I had one individual look over a book proposal. It was like a peer editor, and they were like, I'm so worried about the men who, like, I'm worried about alienating the men. And I don't know, I have feelings on that. Part of me thinks it might be okay to shine a light on something that's not helpful. And there's another part of me that's like, and we want to do it in a way that people can receive it. And
Yeah.
we're not calling this criminal behavior. I mean, there's this, more options.
I think a lot of that again comes down to what are the alternatives.
Mhm.
If the man feels that, well, how else do I get this need met? This is
That's
a
a huge
need for
one.
me.
Hmm.
And how do I know, how do I figure out where that consent line is? That's
Hmm.
such a huge conversation in and of itself.
Hmm.
Like, we think we can recognize body language, but that's not necessarily true. And we're in a society that tells you that um playing coy is showing interest.
Right.
Oh, she's playing hard to get. She
Hmm.
must want more of this.
Hmm.
There's whole books written on that. The book The Game.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, Pepe Le Pew and Penelope. We have cartoons about the chase. We
Yeah.
have movies romanticizing the chase.
Mhm.
So it gets really hard. We tell little kids, oh, he hit you. It's just because he liked you.
Right, right, right.
It permeates our society, this idea that you can't ever trust your instincts
Mhm.
on another person's response because it might prove exactly what the opposite of what you think you're seeing.
Right. Yeah.
So again, giving them the language of negotiation and consent and the wheel of consent and safe words and aftercare and practicing a no and practicing receiving rejection in a setting that isn't that immediately intimidating. you know um Having that opportunity for embodied solo pleasure that can be explored alone,
And that might
making
be the
space for
trickiest.
non-monogamy.
Yeah, that might be the trickiest populations, or those where those ideas are prohibited or less favorable, even just
Mm-hmm.
solo sex and things like that. That's going to be a
Yeah,
trickier sell for that population because there's a harder bind
it is.
perceived there. This was awesome. I really appreciate your time. And I did send a form, so I have all your information. But just
Mm-hmm.
when we publish this or when this gets used in another way, how can people who are just maybe awakening to the possibility of an late in life orientation discovery or wanting support as they choose their own orientation identity labels, how
Yeah.
can they find you and all the things you're creating?
acesexeducation.com or acesexeducation on Instagram. Um, yeah,
Mhm.
that's
And you've
easiest
got
way to reach me.
offerings for the public, but you've also got offerings for mental health professionals. If there's people who this is
I
kind of
do.
language is very new to them, you're educating professionals too.
I have a 6-hour six ASEX CE training on asexuality and aromanticism hosted through Bianca Lariano's Anti-Up program.
I love it.
So
It's great.
yeah, and then yeah, I do individual workshops from time to time too.
Okay. Thank you
But
so much. You gave
yeah,
so much depth and breadth and life to this conversation. I really appreciated it
I
so
appreciate your
much.
willingness to explore all these different ways of looking at these things. And one of the things that I've seen when it comes to including asexuality in these books around desire or whatever,
Yeah,
there's
tell me.
often this inclination to do kind of a disclaimer somewhere in the beginning of the book and say, if you're asexual, none of this matters. And it's
Uh,
so wrong
yeah.
because it is a spectrum. Not everybody is going to identify on it right away. There may have
Hmm.
misconceptions where, they don't recognize that it's a label they have access to.
Yeah.
And because of the spectrum of human sexuality, there's so much overlap between the asexual community and people who do experience sexual attraction but don't want sex or have a lower interest in sex or any of that. So I think everything applies to the asexual community, especially when they may be favorable versus repulsed. So, all of that. Plus, I think the language coming out of the asexual community is applicable across the board. So, if you do include asexuality, I would
Mhm.
love to see it woven throughout the
Okay.
entire book
Yeah,
rather than this, you know, token mention at the beginning of the book and
I
saying, well, if you're
appreciate that
asexual, don't worry
advice.
about it.
Yeah, thank you for that advice. Yeah, that would be, um, it might look inclusive but feel dismissive for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. More than anything, it's like just reminding people, and sexual attraction may not even be a factor. You
Mhm.
know, when we assume sexual attraction is the primary mechanism of arousal, we forget
Mhm.
all the other mechanisms of arousal. So, an
Mm.
asexual person may find arousal through fantasy or touch or toys or all of these other ways of accessing arousal that don't rely on sexual
An
attraction.
attraction.
Kinks, fetishes,
Thank you.
all of it can
Yeah.
still apply.
Yeah. I appreciate that advice. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Well, if you need a sensitivity reader when you got things ready to go, please hit me up.
Really?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. That that's fantastic. I probably will.
Yeah. No, I love books like this. I have, my whole shelf of all of the things. I am constantly trying to read all of these things. And there was the book Desire that came out recently. I don't remember the two authors on it, but I will tell you, they had a lot of great stuff in it, but they intentionally conflated desire and libido. They straight out said we're going to use
Oh.
these terms interchangeably. And
Mm.
that drove me nuts. And I couldn't put my finger on it until I thought about it this way. Think about an itch, scratching an itch. Libido is the itch, desire is the urge to scratch it.
Mm.
They usually happen simultaneously, but they're not the
But they're
same
not the
thing.
same thing. That's fantastic. Thank you. That's really important to this discussion
Mhm.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, all right.
Thank you so much. I
My
appreciate your
pleasure.
time. Okay, we'll talk
Thank
soon.
you.
Thanks,
All
Aubri.
right. Take care.
All
Bye.
right, bye-bye.